You are struggling with a CI pipeline in Gitlab, or you actually don't know what a CI pipeline is all about, then this video is absolutely fine for you. I wish you lots of fun with it, and let's start off with. What can you expect in this video? First of all, I will talk about what actually is continuous integration. What is a typical application? What is the use case of it? In the second step, I will explain the different steps a CI pipeline is made of. So you think about the different aspects that actually compose this CI pipeline. In the third step, I will explain to you what do I need for a CI pipeline and guide you through the different steps that are necessary to set that up in your project. In the fourth and fifth step, I will explain how can you apply this to a small project in Python. And probably the most complex aspect of this video is coming at the end with the server configuration. Okay, so continuous integration is a main aspect if you want to think about software quality and automate a certain task during the development process. So it definitely increases the software quality and it allows you to constantly check different software tests. Of course, it requires that you have written some kind of testing in your application. If you don't have any tests, then the first step is probably, before thinking about a CI pipeline, is to write some tests that you actually can see during the development process if the application changes. Let's describe this with a small example. We start off at the time point t0 with the part A and B. Those rectangles are developed by a team of 2 different developers, and they actually fit quite nicely together. We see that the rectangles don't have any strange edges or something. During the development process, we see, however, that the part A changes and the edges have now a different shape. The part B has not changed. So for example, in part A, the functions and the return parameters have changed and they don't fit any longer to the part B. The part B has changed as well, but only in terms of maybe the documentation. The developer has maybe written more documentation and explaining his application or the part better. So we see that both parts don't fit any longer really good together. Okay, so how does this CI pipeline actually work? First of all, we start off with a new cool function we have implemented, visualized with the rocket. We publish our code or push our code to a Git repository. And the CI pipeline then starts automatically. Of course, you need some kind of pipeline, otherwise this pipeline does not start, but it checks the different functionalities of the program. And you can define actually those different functionalities quite individual. So it's not something that every CI pipeline looks identical. You can really custom design it and apply different checks. For example, build Docker images, run it for different Python versions, compile your application, publish it, and so on. And for example, if the tests are failing due to some case because there's an error or bug in your code, then in most of the cases a notification, so for example an email is sent to the developer, hey, the code is not working, you have pushed to the code, and this actually allows you to jump back to the beginning and rethink about your implementation and actually come up with a better design so your CI pipeline works again. Okay, so what do you need for a CI pipeline? First of all, in this example, we talk about Gitlab. So the first prerequisite is definitely that you need a Gitlab account. You need some Git know-how. Of course, it is not 100% necessary, but it's definitely helpful. You need some kind of software project and tests in order to have something for the CI pipeline. And now I will talk about 2 different options how you can run this pipeline. The first option is more simple, labeled as A, and here you can use the GitLab resources to run your pipeline. And the other advantage is that your server, or you don't need an external server to rent or something. The disadvantage on the other side is that you can only use at the recording of this video 400 minutes of the CI pipeline. This might change in the future, it might increase, decrease, I can't give any guarantee for that. And the option B is probably also the more complex one, but here you can configure your own server. And the server properties, for example the run, depend pretty much how fast your CI pipeline runs and also how many CI pipelines you can run in parallel. But the main aspect is you don't have any time limit in usage, or this 400 minutes limitation is not does not hold true for the option B as well. Okay, so those are the two different options, just to give you a brief overview. Okay, so let's talk about this small Python project, what we will do. I will go to Visual Studio Code. I will write a small function and some tests. I will do that with PyTest. And then in the next step, we will write a GitLab CI YAML file. And this is the main property, or the main file really, how you can write your pipeline. And then we will publish the code to GitLab, and you see how this different pipeline runs. And I think this gives you probably a really practical understanding. Okay, so let's jump to Visual Studio Code. Okay, here we are. So I've already created a new document. We can maybe create also a small terminal here. Okay, so we create a new, first of all, a small overview about the folder structure. So we make a folder called app, and then we create another folder with the tests, and then we will create different files. Okay, so the first file is called functions.py, and the other one we will just call new file test functions.py. And then another helpful tip I can give you is always to create a virtual environment for your Python projects. So in this case, I will just install PyTest. This also allows to reuse this later in our GitLab CI pipeline. And therefore, now we have pip and PyTest installed, and we can run pipenv shell. And what we now have is our virtual environment. We see that with the parentheses in the front, and this allows to execute our Python commands independent of our main system installation. Okay, so let's write a function. We will just write a really simple function. I will just call it add. We add two integers in there, so a plus b, and then we can go to here and write from app.functions import sum. And to create actually a test, we write test sum, and this is our test case for PyTest. And here we can just say assert at this is sum, so 1 plus 10 should be 11, right? And one thing we just have to add is to create those init files. You might be wondering why. The reason is that in order to look up our folder structure, so you might have already seen it, in our test.functions file, we actually call from app.functions, and the init files over here allow us to run that quite easily. Okay, so let's run our tests. We run python-free -m pytest, and let's see if this was working or not. Okay, so we see cannot import name sum from app.functions. And why? Because we have written it as add. So let's fix that. Okay, and we also see add 1 plus 10 is equal to 1. Let's figure that out. So we should have written here 11. And if we run the tests now, we see the tests are passing again. Okay. Good. So we initialize a Git repository, and then we just jump to Gitlab, where we create a new project. So we will just create that here. Gitlab example YouTube. We create a new project, and then we can just run those commands. Just paste them in there so you can see them. We first of all have to add our remote. We will do this by that. Then we add our folders. So we add those. Then we add our pip files. I typically write just git commit. So we can just write here initial commit, and then we can just run git push. So we have to, sorry, I forgot that. So git push minus u origin master. So in the next step, when we push code again, then we can just use git push. Okay. So this is now finished. Let's have a look at Gitlab again. And if we refresh our website, then we see, this initial commit is already up there. Okay, so then we can jump back to VS Code and see what we have there. Okay, so we write our gitlab.yaml file, gitlab ci.yaml. Okay, and now comes the real aspect for the CI pipeline. And the first aspect you have to think about is different stages. You might be wondering why, but in a CI pipeline, you typically run through different steps. In the first step, if we consider a C++ project, we compile our code and then run our executable. In another test, we can think about, how can we compile our executable code with different functions and so on. So there are different parameters that can be considered. And for this use case, you can use different stages. And if we run that, so we write the first term, this is stages, and then we can just write, for example, for our first stage, we just call it test. And now we write a certain step in the CI pipeline, and we just call that GitLab, or we just call that Python tests. And if you're not so familiar with Docker, now comes the first contact with it, because we have to think about the environment our CI pipeline runs. And in most cases, it is typically a Docker container. And the Docker container allows us to reuse or to run our code in an untouched environment. And therefore, you have to select some kind of container. There are tons of different containers you can select. And for each project, you select an appropriate one. In Python, a typically container would be, in our case, so the latest release is Python 3.9. So we use this container. And for the stage, we just call it here. So we write stage test. And then in the next step, we can write our script. So what should actually happen? And I would suggest that we first install our pipenv, so we can install our dependencies from the pip file. So when we run pip3 install pipenv, and we run now, we add our pipeline, and then we just write edit GitLab CI pipeline file, and now we can jump back to Firefox. Let's have a look. And if everything goes fine, we see here our blue circle, and we see pipeline is running. Okay, let's have a closer look into that. We see Python tests, and now this is the typical CI pipeline environment. We see here using Docker executor with image Python 3.9, and this image is just currently set up. Okay, so we have preparing environment, and now the Git repository is cloned into that environment, and we see here our script we just have talked about, pip3 install pipenv, and that worked. Okay, so now we can go back to our file and extend it. So we've already seen that is working, and then we can just run pipenv install to install our dependencies, and then we can just write python 3 -m pytest. And now when we git add tests, git add gitlab ci YAML file, and then we can just, so GCP just is an abbreviation. If you're wondering, it stands for git, commit, and push, and this just reduces the terms to write. Okay, so writing more tasks to pipeline. Okay, so yeah, we see this is all running. And what we also consider now is that we are still using option A, right? So we haven't set up our server, and we can use the already provided GitLab CI hours. Okay, this takes up some time. Pulling Docker images and so on. Yeah, so this is actually relatively straightforward. We see this is working as well. Okay, so we see pipenv install, and let's wait if the tests are also working. Yeah, and what we see here, python 3 -m pytest module not found, because what we have to consider is obviously that we have to run it from the Python from the pipenv command, right? So we can just say here python 3 run python 3, and then we update our running command from pipenv. And now we also have seen what happens when the pipeline is failing. It is running again. I mean, the error was already relatively clear. Okay, so we have pulling Docker images Python 3.9. pipenv install. Yeah, we have been already at this point. So let's see how this turns out. Okay, pipenv run python 3 -m pytest. Yeah, and there we've seen, the test session has started. So everything is working fine now. Okay, that's cool. Okay, so now we will come to the final part of this video, where we talk about the server configuration. The configuration is definitely a little bit more complex, but I provided you all the commands in the presentation, and you can also find it on my website. And what do you need for that? So first of all, you need some kind of own server. You can also run all those Docker commands on your local machine, but then you have to consider that your machine has to be online and of course need to have access to the internet so it can run all the different tests during your development process. So an external server is quite affordable. It costs you maybe a few euros or dollars per month, and you can probably find different providers if you Google, for example, with the term VPS, and it should have some kind of Unix operating system that's in general quite helpful. Most of the servers come out of the box with an Ubuntu system. That's definitely quite helpful. You need some kind of terminal. Maybe there's also an online solution. If your computer does not support this, it is helpful to have some kind of Docker knowledge, but the amount of Docker intensity, or the amount of commands, it is not really high. You can pretty much copy paste the different commands. So what we will do in our server configuration time, or in the different steps, are first of all we will update our server. We create a new user so that we can log in with that user into our server without the root user, because the root user is always the default user, and we will disable that root user so we will not delete it, but we will disable the SSA access. That's the third point. In the fourth point, we will enable our passwordless login. That is pretty much just a convenience aspect. You don't have to do that. The fifth and sixth step are definitely necessary because we will install Docker and we will register our GitLab runner. Okay, so let's jump off in our terminal. I've already prepared that, so I'm already logged into in the machine. We will just run the update and upgrade command. So first of all, upgrade, and then we will just and then we can update our server. So sorry, so I flipped that. So first of all we have to update and then we can upgrade. Sorry for the inconvenience. So that takes a little bit of time. We will say yes to all the upgrades or updates. We can already create a new window. And then is the next step to create our new user. I will create a new user called YouTube. Then we will change the password of this user. Okay, so when we run this, we should be able to log in by entering our password. This is working really nice. Then we will add the user to the sudo group. Okay, so this is working as well. Nice. Okay, then we will edit the sudo configuration. We just have to log in and log out. So we can use our sudo rights. Sorry, that was wrong. Then we look for the root login. So this is not the first one. Okay, so what we have to look with a capital. There we have it. We can just disable that, and then we can restart. Sorry. Yeah. And now when we want to log in again with the root user, so here comes the question for the password. I enabled that, or I actually don't know the root password because my SSH key was already provided. So this is the indicator that we can't log in directly with our SSH key. Okay, so we can clean that up a little bit. And now what we can do next is, to install Docker. Okay, so just run that command. That also takes a little bit of time. Okay, Docker is installed. Now we will add our user to the Docker group. And when we log out and log in again, we can run docker ps, and we should see that there are no containers running. And then we can just say docker run hello world. Okay, so this is working really nice. Now we can set up our GitLab runner, and therefore we paste this rather, or we have to execute this rather lengthy command. This pulls the GitLab runner, and once that is set up, we can register our runner. And in the meantime, we can actually go to, let's wait, yeah. So we can start the registration process. So here we enter gitlab.com because we entered the default, or we used the default one. And now we have to go back to Firefox. And yeah, so what we have to do is just a quick second. Okay, so when we go to our GitLab instance, we see here that we go here to runners, and then we can say here, use the following token, and we can paste that into our terminal. So like here, then we can describe our runner. We don't have to provide any tags. And for the default executor, we use Docker. And with the image, with the latest Ubuntu image, that's our default image. Okay, so here we go. That's already successfully set up. And if we go back now to Firefox again. Then we see here when we go, first of all, let's go back. And when we expand the runners, we should see here our runner. And we can go then to runners. We can say here run pipeline. Then we just hit here run pipeline again. And now that takes a little bit of time, but when we go back to our server, we should actually see that the runner is executing some code. Okay, so we see here pulling Docker image, like in the other pipeline. Now it's preparing this environment. Okay, so when we go back to, and here we see our GitLab runner. So those are all the necessary steps to set it up. Of course, there are maybe other different ways, but the Docker installation and the GitLab runner, that is probably the most important aspect of this tutorial. And so I hope you have enjoyed this video. It has provided you the necessary steps and guidelines. And if you've liked that video, hit the thumbs up button, leave a subscription, and I would say I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.